The city is quiet, but it is not peaceful. Tokyo is asleep, yet the air feels heavy. People lie on thin mats, windows open to the night heat. Somewhere far above, beyond the clouds, engines move through the dark. They are not seen. They are barely heard. But they are coming. For years, Japan believed its home islands were safe. The ocean was wide. The distance was long. The war burned far away in places with strange names. Tonight, that belief begins to break. No warning reaches the streets below. No clear signal tells people what is about to happen. There is only a strange stillness, followed by a feeling that something is wrong. High in the sky, young American pilots stare into black space. Their faces are tight. Their eyes burn from hours of flight. Below them is nothing but darkness. No landmarks, no familiar ground. They trust their maps. They trust their orders. They trust that this long flight will matter. Many of them have never seen Tokyo before. Tonight, they will never forget it. In the city, a man wakes to a distant sound. It feels like thunder, but the sky is clear. A mother sits up, holding her child closer. Somewhere, a dog begins to bark. The sound above grows stronger, then fades, then returns. People listen, unsure if fear is real or imagined. This is how modern war enters a home, quietly, without asking. For Japan's leaders, this moment was always feared, but never fully accepted. Plans were made on paper, reports were read. But belief is harder than planning. To believe that the enemy could reach the capital meant accepting that the war was no longer distant. It meant the shield was gone. Tonight, that truth arrives without mercy. Inside the aircraft, tension fills the narrow space. Each man knows his role. Each man knows the cost of a mistake. The engines roar, steady and loud, like a heartbeat that never stops. The flight has taken many hours. Fuel is watched carefully. The return journey feels far away. There is no turning back now. Down below, Tokyo stretches endlessly. Wood and paper homes sit close together. Narrow streets twist like threads. Factories hide among houses. Schools rest beside shops. It is a living city, full of ordinary life. It was never built for war from the sky. No city truly is. Suddenly, the night changes. Sirens begin to cry out. Too late for many. Lights flicker, then go dark. Confusion spreads faster than fear. People rush into the streets. Some look up. Some run. Some freeze, unsure where safety can be found. Orders shout through the darkness, but they overlap and clash. No one fully understands what is happening. Above them, hatches open. Hands move with training learned far from here. There is no cheering, no joy, only silence and focus. The men know there are people below. They also know their mission cannot stop now. War has carried them to this point. Choice feels distant. The first explosions are not seen by everyone, but they are felt. The ground shakes. Air rushes through streets. Windows shatter. Fire begins to glow where darkness lived moments before. Panic rises like smoke. People grab what they can. Some search for family. Some search for exits that do not exist. Japanese defenses respond, but slowly. Confusion fills command rooms. Radar reports are unclear. Messages cross paths. Orders come late or not at all. Fighters scramble into the sky, but the enemy is already there, already moving. The idea of control slips away minute by minute. For civilians, time loses meaning. Minutes feel like hours. Streets become rivers of people. The sound of aircraft never seems to end. Each new wave brings fresh fear. Not knowing is the hardest part. Not knowing where to go. Not knowing when it will stop. In the air, American crews face fear of a different kind. Searchlights cut through the sky. Bursts of fire rise toward them. Every flash could mean the end. They grip their positions and hold steady. Training keeps them moving. Fear waits quietly behind every thought. This is not a single strike. It is the opening of something larger. A message sent not with words, but with force. The message says that distance no longer protects, that the war has found Japan's heart, that the future will not look like the past. As fires spread, the city changes shape. Familiar streets vanish behind smoke. Night turns into a harsh red glow. People who survived the first moments now face a long night of escape and endurance. There is no victory here, only survival. Above, planes turn for home. Fuel is low, bodies are tired, minds are heavy. Below them, Tokyo burns, but the question remains unanswered. Will this break Japan's will or harden it? Will fear end the war or deepen it? By morning, nothing feels the same. The capital has been touched. The shield is broken. And both nations stand at the edge of a new and dangerous chapter, unsure how far this path will go. The bombing of Tokyo was not just about damage to a city. It was about pressure. It was about time. It was about forcing a choice that neither side wanted to make easily. For America, this moment carried the weight of years of fighting across the Pacific. Every island taken had cost lives. Every mile forward felt slower than planned. Leaders in Washington asked a hard question. How long could this war continue if Japan refused to bend? Japan's leaders asked a different question. How much pain could their nation endure before it broke? For a long time, they believed endurance was their greatest weapon. They believed the people would hold on. They believed the enemy would grow tired first. The sea had protected them before. Pride had protected them in their own minds. Tokyo symbolized that belief. It was the heart of the nation. If it stood strong, Japan stood strong. America saw Tokyo as more than a capital. It was a center of command, production, and morale. Hitting it was meant to send a message that no place was beyond reach. Not the borders, not the leaders, not the people. The hope was simple, but heavy. If Japan felt the war at home, maybe the war would end sooner. Maybe fewer soldiers would die on distant beaches. But this idea carried risk. Bombing cities did not always bring surrender. Sometimes it brought anger. Sometimes it brought unity. American planners debated these fears in quiet rooms, far from the flames. They knew they were stepping into new ground. The scale was larger. The distance was greater. The outcome was uncertain. For Japan, the stakes were even higher. Losing control of the air over Tokyo meant losing the image of safety. It meant admitting weakness to the people and to the world. Leaders feared not just defeat, but loss of honor. Many believed surrender was worse than destruction. This belief shaped every decision. It slowed every choice. It made compromise feel impossible. The people of Tokyo carried none of these plans in their hands. They were workers, parents, children, and elders. They were told to be strong. They were told to trust. But few were told how close the war truly was. When the bombings came, confusion spread faster than understanding. Fear replaced belief overnight. Strategically, this battle marked a shift. The war was no longer only about ships and islands. It became a test of endurance between nations. Could air power alone change the direction of history? Could fear from above succeed where armies on the ground had struggled? These questions hung in the smoke-filled air. For America, success was measured not just in damage, but in reaction. Did Japan change its strategy? Did its leaders argue more openly? Did doubt appear where certainty once lived? Intelligence reports searched for signs. Every response mattered. Silence mattered too. For Japan, survival became the new measure. Factories were moved. Defenses were stretched thin. Fighters were asked to do more with less. The gap between reality and belief grew wider. Some leaders saw the truth clearly. Others refused to look at it at all. This battle mattered because it stripped away distance. It showed that modern war had no safe center. It followed people home. It tested ideas of honor against the cost of survival. It forced both nations to confront limits they had tried to ignore. What began over Tokyo would echo far beyond the city. It would shape decisions still to come. It would narrow choices until only the hardest ones remained. And it would leave scars not just on land, but on memory. Before the fires reached Tokyo, the war had already been pressing in from all sides. Across the Pacific, islands had fallen one by one. Each battle had taken longer than expected. Each victory had come at a heavy price. American leaders felt trapped by time. The public wanted the war to end. Soldiers were exhausted. Commanders searched for a way to force Japan to face reality without another endless campaign on the ground. The Pacific Ocean, once seen as a barrier, slowly turned into a highway. New airfields appeared on distant islands. Long runways were carved out of coral and jungle. Each new base pulled Japan's home islands closer into reach. What once seemed impossible now felt only difficult. Distance was shrinking, and with it, Japan's sense of safety. Inside Japan, the picture looked very different. Official messages spoke of strength and unity. Newspapers avoided bad news. Radio voices remained calm and confident. People were told that hardship was normal, that sacrifice was honorable, that endurance would lead to victory. Many believed this because they wanted to believe it. To doubt felt dangerous. Yet beneath the surface, fear was growing. Supplies were harder to find. Food was rationed. Families felt the strain of long war years. Young men were already gone, sent far away, many never to return. Still, the idea that enemy aircraft could reach Tokyo felt unreal. The capital had always stood untouched. It felt permanent, protected by fate. Military leaders argued quietly. Some warned that air defenses were not ready. Fighters were limited. Fuel was short. Radar coverage was weak. Others believed the enemy would never risk such long flights. They trusted tradition more than technology. They trusted spirit more than machines. These beliefs shaped decisions that could not be undone later. In America, planning rooms were filled with map and long discussions. Air power was seen as a solution to a problem that seemed unsolvable. If Japan would not surrender, perhaps pressure from the sky would break the deadlock. The idea was not only to damage factories, but to shake confidence, to show that resistance had a cost felt every night. Pilots trained for missions longer than anything before. They learned to fly for hours over empty ocean, with no place to land if something went wrong. They memorized procedures. They practiced silence. They understood that once airborne, they were alone with their crew and their fate. Back in Tokyo, Daily life continued in small ways. Children went to school. Shops opened in the morning. People lined up for food. Air raid drills were held, but often treated lightly. Sirens were tested. Shelters were prepared. Still, few believed they would truly be needed. War felt close, but not here. This gap between belief and reality was dangerous. It allowed comfort where urgency was needed. It slowed change when speed mattered most. The world before the bombings was a world holding its breath without knowing it. All the signs were there. The pressure, the movement, the shrinking distance. But history often turns not on signs, but on moments when belief finally collapses. Tokyo was standing at the edge of that moment. The men who shaped this campaign were far from the streets that would soon burn. They sat in rooms filled with maps and quiet voices. They spoke of range, fuel, weather, and timing. But beneath every calm sentence lived fear and doubt. They knew they were asking young crews to fly farther than ever before. They knew many might not return. Still, they believed the risk was necessary. American air commanders carried strong faith in air power. They believed that pressure from the sky could do what years of fighting had not. Some believed that showing strength would shorten the war and save lives in the end. Others worried about what would happen if it failed. No one had clear answers, only hard choices. Pilots listened carefully, but they were not part of the debate. They trusted their leaders. They trusted their training. Many were barely out of school. Some had never seen combat before, yet they were told they would strike the heart of Japan. Pride mixed with fear. Silence filled the room as orders were given. On the Japanese side, leaders faced a different kind of pressure. They had promised protection. They had promised control. To admit weakness now felt like betrayal. Some officers understood the danger clearly. They warned that defenses were thin and the enemy was learning fast. But voices of caution often lost to voices of pride. Air defense commanders worked with what they had. Old equipment, limited fuel, tired crews. Fighters were spread across many duties. Radar was unreliable. Communication was slow. They prepared as best they could, hoping that warning would come in time, hoping that skill and spirit could make up for shortages. Political leaders struggled with fear they could not show. They worried about panic. They worried about loss of faith. They worried about what would happen if the people stopped believing. So, they chose calm words, strong speeches. They hid doubt behind confidence. In doing so, they delayed change. These were not evil men making careless choices. They were humans under pressure, shaped by belief, pride, and fear. Each decision felt reasonable in its moment. Each mistake felt small until it was too late. As planning continued on both sides, the path narrowed. Every choice closed another door. The pilots prepared. The defenses waited. The city slept. The war was no longer only about armies and fleets. It was about minds under strain. About leaders choosing between bad options. About faith in ideas tested by reality. And soon, those ideas would collide in the sky above Tokyo. The night air breaks first, not with light, but with sound. A deep, steady roar spreads across the sky. It does not rush. It does not warn. It simply arrives. For those awake in Tokyo, the sound feels wrong, too heavy, too many. For those asleep, it pulls them from dreams into fear they cannot yet name. Sirens begin to cry out across the city. Their voices rise and fall, echoing between buildings. Some people move at once, others hesitate, unsure if this is another drill. Confusion steals precious moments. In narrow streets, doors open. Feet hurry. Voices call out names. Darkness presses in as lights are shut off. The city tries to disappear. Above the clouds, the pilots see faint shapes below. A coastline, a river, the shadow of a vast city. Navigation lights stay dark. Words are few. Each man knows his task. Training takes over where thought would only slow the body. Hands move. Switches click. The aircraft holds steady. The first explosions feel distant, even to those close by. A dull thud, a shock through the ground. Then another, and another. The air changes. Heat rushes through streets. Windows burst outward. People stumble and fall. Panic spreads faster than sound. Orders are shouted, but no single voice leads the crowd. Fire begins small, then grows. A single spark becomes a glow. The glow becomes a wall of light. Wooden homes catch quickly. Wind feeds the flames. Streets that once guided people now trap them. Smoke rises and hides the stars. Breathing becomes hard. Eyes burn. Fear takes shape. Japanese defenses respond in pieces. Searchlights sweep the sky, crossing and missing. Anti-aircraft fire climbs upward, scattered and unsure. Fighters rise, but too late and too few. Pilots search the dark for shapes that vanish as quickly as they appear. Command posts struggle to understand what is happening. Reports conflict. Lines go silent. For civilians, the night becomes endless. Families lose each other in crowds. Parents lift children onto their shoulders. Some find shelters. Others find only open streets and heat. The city feels alive in the worst way, moving and shifting, pushing people where it wants them to go. In the air, American crews feel the danger closing in. Light bursts near their wings. The aircraft shakes. Every second feels stretched. Some planes turn back early, damaged or lost. Others press on, dropping their loads and moving forward into darkness again. No one cheers. No one speaks of success. This is not the clean strike imagined on maps. It is messy, loud, uncontrolled. Plans bend and break. Reality refuses to follow lines drawn far away. Both sides feel it now. The gap between expectation and truth widens with every passing minute. As the hours pass, the fires merge. The city glows from end to end. Smoke covers everything. Even those far from the flames feel the heat and fear. Tokyo is no longer a single place. It is many small battles for survival happening at once. Near dawn, the sound of engines fades. Planes turn toward home. Below them, the city smolders. The night has changed everything, but no one yet knows how much. What began as a plan has become a test neither side fully understood. And this was only the beginning. As the smoke drifted over Tokyo, both sides began to understand that this was not just another raid. Something had shifted. The scale was different. The impact was deeper. What mattered now were the decisions made in the hours and days that followed. Small choices made under pressure began to shape the future of the war. American commanders studied reports as they arrived. The damage was greater than expected. Fires had spread faster than planned. Crews reported that the city below had offered little resistance. This raised new questions. If the defenses were weak, should tactics change? If fire caused more disruption than precision, should targets change too? These were not easy thoughts. Each answer carried consequences. One key decision emerged quietly: bombing altitude. Earlier raids had aimed high, seeking accuracy and safety. But high altitude brought strong winds and poor results. Crews missed targets. Bombs fell wide. Now, evidence suggested that flying lower increased impact, but also danger. Leaders weighed risk against effect. They chose effect. This choice changed everything. Lower altitude meant more exposure, but also more control. It meant seeing the city clearly. It meant understanding how vulnerable it truly was. This was not cruelty driving the decision. It was desperation, a belief that ending the war sooner would save lives later. Still, the weight of that belief rested on every crew sent out again. On the Japanese side, the turning points were shaped by delay. Leaders struggled to accept what had happened. Some believed the raid was an exception. Others warned it was a sign of things to come. Air defense commanders asked for more resources, more fuel, more planes. There was little to give. The system was already stretched thin. Another critical decision followed: civil defense. Should people be moved out of cities? Should factories be broken apart and hidden? These ideas were discussed, but slowly. Tradition and fear of panic held leaders back. They worried that moving people would signal weakness. They worried that truth would break morale. In choosing calm, they lost time. For civilians, decisions were made without choice: run or stay, hide or move, help others or search for family. Each moment forced action. Some found safety by chance, others did not. Survival often depended on seconds and direction. No training could prepare them for this. In the air, pilots faced their own turning points. Fatigue grew with each mission. Fear became familiar. Some questioned the purpose. Others pushed doubt aside and focused on the task. Crews learned quickly. They adjusted routes. They adapted to defenses. Experience replaced uncertainty, but not fear. Weather also played its role. Wind carried fire farther than anyone expected. Streets became funnels for heat. Shelters became traps. These were not planned outcomes. They were results of nature meeting human decision. Once started, they could not be controlled. Japanese fighter pilots made brave choices with limited tools. They rose again and again, often outnumbered and outmatched. Some knew they could not win. They flew anyway, not for victory, but for duty, for delay, for hope that endurance might still matter. Inside command rooms, arguments grew sharper. Some leaders began to see the truth. The war was reaching a breaking point. Others refused to accept it. They believed that suffering would strengthen resolve, that pain would harden the nation. These beliefs clashed quietly, but no clear path emerged. American planners also faced doubt. Each successful raid raised moral weight. They asked whether pressure alone would force surrender, or whether it would only deepen resistance. Intelligence reports were unclear. Signals were mixed. Hope and fear lived side by side. One decision after another narrowed the road ahead. Each choice closed off easier endings. What remained were harder paths. More raids, more suffering, more uncertainty. No one controlled the full picture anymore. The war was moving under its own force. Chance played its part, too. A change in wind, a delayed order, a missed signal. Small moments carried large effects. History often turns not on grand plans, but on these quiet details. By now, both nations understood that the Tokyo bombings were not an event, but a process, a campaign shaped by belief, fear, and necessity. Turning points had been crossed, even if no one said it aloud. The question was no longer if the war would change, but how much it would cost before it did. When the fires finally slowed, what remained was silence mixed with shock. The city did not feel alive anymore. It felt wounded. Streets that once carried voices now carried smoke. Familiar paths were gone. Landmarks had vanished. People stood still, not knowing where to go next, because the place they remembered no longer existed. For civilians, survival became the only measure of time. Hours blurred together. Many had run until their legs failed. Others had hidden wherever space allowed. When morning came, it revealed faces covered in ash and eyes filled with disbelief. Families searched through crowds, calling names that did not answer. Some reunions brought tears of relief. Many searches ended in silence. Children struggled to understand what had happened. The night had stolen their sense of safety. Parents tried to stay calm, even as their own fear pressed inward. They spoke softly, offering comfort they did not feel themselves. In these moments, courage was quiet. It was found in holding hands and taking one step forward. Emergency workers moved through destruction with limited tools. They were tired before they even began. Fires still burned in hidden places. Smoke lingered low. Every rescue felt like a race against time. There were too many cries, too many places to search. Choices had to be made quickly, and those choices left lasting scars. For many, loss arrived before understanding. Homes were gone. Possessions were gone. Years of life had vanished in a single night. Some stood where their houses once stood, staring at empty ground. They did not cry at first. Shock held the tears back. Grief would come later, when the mind allowed it. Hospitals filled beyond capacity. Doctors and nurses worked without rest. Supplies ran low. They treated burns, injuries, and exhaustion, but they could not treat fear. They could not erase memory. Survivors carried the night with them, even as their bodies healed. Above all, there was confusion. Why had this happened? How could it have been allowed? Questions spread quietly. Many were afraid to speak them aloud. Doubt crept into places where certainty once lived. Trust weakened. Belief began to crack. On the other side of the ocean, the human cost looked different, but was no less real. American air crews returned to bases with tired faces and heavy minds. Some celebrated survival. Others sat alone, replaying the night again and again. They knew they had followed orders. Still, the images below stayed with them. Pilots wrote letters home, careful with their words. They spoke of long flights and difficult missions. They avoided details. How could they explain what it felt like to watch a city burn from above? How could they explain the mix of duty and doubt that followed them back to the ground? Loss touched them too. Some planes did not return. Empty bunks stood quietly in barracks. Crews asked no questions. They already knew the answers. Survival brought relief, but also guilt. Why had they returned when others had not? Fatigue became constant. Missions came again and again. Sleep was short. Fear became familiar. Some men grew silent. Others joked to hide the weight they carried. War demanded strength, but it did not teach how to carry memory. Back in Tokyo, survival meant adapting fast. People moved into shelters, schools, and temples. Communities formed among strangers. Food was shared. Stories were exchanged in low voices. In loss, people found connection. It did not erase pain, but it gave it shape. Yet fear remained close. Every distant sound felt dangerous. Every clear night brought worry. Sirens no longer felt like drills. They felt like warnings written into the body. Sleep became shallow. Dreams became crowded with fire and noise. This was the true cost of the battle. Not numbers, not reports, but the lasting weight carried by ordinary people on both sides. War had entered homes and minds. It did not leave when the planes did. The city would rebuild in time. So would airfields. But the people were changed forever. They had learned how fragile safety truly was, how quickly normal life could disappear, how war followed no rules of fairness. This human cost did not end the war, but it reshaped it. It altered how leaders thought. It altered how people felt. It made the future heavier with consequence. And as both nations looked ahead, they carried these memories forward, knowing that whatever came next would demand even more. When the smoke cleared enough to see the shape of the city again, one truth became impossible to hide. Tokyo had survived, but it had not been protected. The capital still stood, yet it stood wounded. For Japan, this was not victory or defeat. It was endurance, and endurance came at a terrible price. Japanese leaders studied the damage in silence. Reports arrived slowly and often incomplete. Some spoke of destruction beyond expectation. Others focused on what still remained. The city was damaged, but the government still functioned. Factories still worked, though weakened. Rail lines still moved, though strained. To some, this meant hope. To others, it meant delay. No single moment marked an end. There was no clear signal of defeat. Life did not stop. Instead, it bent. People adapted because they had to. That adaptation was seen by leaders as strength, proof that the nation could continue. But beneath that surface strength lived exhaustion and fear that could not be measured. For America, the question of victory felt just as unclear. The raids had caused heavy damage. They had exposed weakness. Yet Japan had not surrendered. Each success raised a harder question. How much pressure was enough? And how much more would be required before the war truly ended? Commanders debated quietly. Some believed the bombing campaign was working. They pointed to destroyed areas and disrupted production. Others warned that destruction alone might not break resolve. History offered no easy answer. Every path forward carried risk and cost. For air crews, survival became routine, but victory remained distant. Missions continued. Flights grew familiar. Fear did not disappear. It simply learned how to wait. Each takeoff carried the same thought. Return, if possible. Each landing felt like borrowed time. In Japan, people rebuilt with whatever they could find. Wood scraps became walls. Cloth became shelter. Communities leaned on each other because there was no other choice. This was not hope born of optimism. It was hope born of necessity. Children returned to makeshift schools. Lessons continued beside ruins. Teachers spoke of duty and future. Students listened, but their minds wandered. War had taken something from them that could not be taught back. The bombing of Tokyo did not bring a clear winner. It brought a narrowing of choices. Japan's leaders faced shrinking options. America's leaders faced growing responsibility. Each side moved forward, not because they were certain, but because stopping felt impossible. This was survival, not peace. A pause filled with tension, a moment where both nations stood on opposite sides of a widening gap, unsure how to cross it without falling. The battle had ended, but the war had not, and the path ahead would demand even harder decisions, carrying lessons written in fire and silence. After the bombings, the war entered a different phase. It was no longer only about ships sinking or islands changing hands. It became a war of pressure and patience, a war where choices felt heavier than weapons. Both sides began to feel that time itself had turned against them. In Japan, the shock moved slowly through the system. Officials tried to keep control of the story. They spoke of resilience. They spoke of unity. They spoke of rebuilding. But behind closed doors, the mood had changed. Meetings lasted longer. Voices grew quieter. The question was no longer whether the enemy could strike again, but when. Military planners faced an impossible task. Defending the entire homeland from the air required resources Japan no longer had. Fuel was limited. Aircraft were aging. Skilled pilots were few. Every plane used to defend the capital was one not used elsewhere. Every choice weakened another front. The defense net had holes, and everyone knew it. Factories were pushed to move or scatter. Production was broken into smaller parts, hidden among neighborhoods and countryside. This slowed output and increased strain. Workers were tired. Transportation failed often. The system still worked, but only just. The idea of total control faded day by day. For civilians, the aftermath meant living inside uncertainty. Nights were no longer for rest. Clear skies caused fear. People learned to read the sound of engines. They learned to pack quickly. They learned how to leave without knowing where they would return. War became a routine, but never a normal one. Morale was spoken of often, but rarely understood. Some people grew more determined. Others felt hollow. Many simply focused on surviving the next day. Hope became smaller and closer. Not victory, not peace, just safety until morning. In America, the results of the bombing campaign were studied carefully. Analysts searched for signs of collapse. They measured damage. They counted disrupted factories. They listened to intercepted messages. The picture was mixed. Japan was hurt, but not broken. Pressure had increased, but surrender had not followed. This created a dangerous momentum. If the strategy did not work fast enough, it demanded more force. More raids. More risk. Leaders worried about the cost, but they also worried about delay. Every month the war continued meant more lives lost elsewhere. The air campaign began to feel not just like an option, but like a path with no exit. Allied planners now faced a grim future. An invasion of Japan would be costly beyond imagination. Casualty estimates climbed. Maps were filled with red lines and arrows pointing toward beaches that had never known war. Compared to that future, air power still seemed the lesser evil. This belief hardened policy. Japan's leaders felt this pressure closing in, but remained divided. Some believed the nation could still force better terms by holding out. Others quietly feared that every delay only made the end worse. Yet to speak openly of surrender felt unthinkable. Tradition, fear, and honor stood in the way. The Tokyo bombings also changed how war itself was understood. Cities were no longer just homes. They were seen as systems, places where morale, industry, and command all met. This thinking would shape every decision that followed, not only in this war, but in wars to come. For those who lived through it, These ideas meant little. What mattered was water, food, shelter, and rest. What mattered was family. The grand strategy played out far above their reach, yet they carried its weight every day. As raids continued, the line between front and home disappeared completely. War was everywhere, in the sky, in the streets, in the mind. The future felt smaller, narrower, harder to imagine. The Tokyo bombings did not end the war, but they closed many doors. They made compromise harder. They made escalation easier. They forced both nations to walk forward into uncertainty, carrying lessons learned too late. History often remembers moments of decision, but it is the long aftermath that truly shapes outcomes. The waiting, the doubt, the slow realization that there may be no clean ending. And as the war moved closer to its final stage, one truth became clear. What had begun over Tokyo would echo far beyond it, shaping choices that would change the world forever. As the war moved toward its final stretch, the memory of Tokyo never left those who had lived through it. The fires faded, the smoke cleared, but the feeling remained, a quiet understanding that something had changed forever. The idea of safety had been broken, not just for Japan, but for the world. For Japan, the bombings forced a painful truth into the open. Courage and endurance alone could not stop machines that crossed oceans and struck without warning. Tradition could not block the sky. Belief could not replace fuel, planes, or time. Yet this truth arrived slowly, resisted at every step. Nations, like people, struggle most when forced to admit limits. For America, Tokyo raised questions that never fully found easy answers. Air power had shown its strength, but also its weight. The ability to reach a city did not automatically bring peace. Power created responsibility. Each success carried a moral cost that could not be measured on maps or charts. Victory, when it came, would not feel clean. The people on both sides carried the deepest lessons. Civilians learned how fragile normal life truly is, how quickly homes, routines, and certainty can disappear. Soldiers and pilots learned that duty does not protect the heart from memory, that following orders does not erase the images that return in quiet moments. Tokyo became a symbol of modern war, a war without clear lines, a war where distance no longer mattered, a war where entire societies felt the pressure once reserved for armies alone. This shift would shape the world long after the guns fell silent. History often focuses on endings, on surrender documents and official announcements, but the meaning of this battle lives elsewhere. It lives in the long nights of fear, in the choices made under pressure, in the silence that follows destruction, in the understanding that technology can outrun wisdom if humanity is not careful. The Tokyo bombings remind us that wars are not decided only by strength, but by how nations respond when strength fails to bring quick answers. They remind us that every decision carries echoes far beyond its moment, and that the cost of war is paid longest by those who never chose it. This story is not about blame. It is about understanding. Understanding how fear, belief, pride, and desperation can guide nations down paths they never planned to walk. Understanding how ordinary people endure the weight of extraordinary events. When we look back at Tokyo, we are not just looking at a city in flames. We are looking at a turning point in how humanity fights, survives, and remembers. A warning written into history, asking whether future generations will learn or repeat the same choices again. This is where the story ends. But the lessons do not. If this documentary helped you see history more clearly and more humanly, subscribe to this channel. More stories like this are waiting, and understanding the past is the first step toward shaping a better future.